Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at one of the most significant infrastructure and energy-related developments in the Russia-Ukraine war so far. The sudden damage to Russia's largest oil processing facility and the loss of what Moscow itself has called a strategic industrial link, worth more than $20 billion. This is not a story about explosions for shock value. It is a story about energy, logistics, economics, and how modern war is increasingly decided far away from the front line, inside pipelines, refineries, ports, and power grids. In the early hours of the morning, Ukrainian long-range drones reached a facility deep inside Russian territory, a major oil processing and export hub that plays a central role in supplying fuel to Russian industry, transport, and the military. Russian authorities confirmed a serious fire and shut down. Independent satellite images later showed large sections of the site offline. For Ukraine, this was not just another strike. It was a deliberate attempt to weaken Russia's ability to sustain its war economy. For Russia, it was a reminder that even the most heavily defended parts of its industrial heartland are no longer safe. To understand why this matters, we need to step back and look at what exactly was hit, why it matters so much, and what it changes not just on the battlefield, but in the global energy system. The facility targeted is one of Russia's largest oil refineries and export nodes. It processes millions of barrels of crude oil each year and produces gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and other petroleum products used across Russia and exported abroad. It is tightly integrated into Russia's pipeline network, rail system, and ports. This refinery is not just a factory. It is a link in a long chain that starts in oil fields thousands of kilometers away and ends in tanks, trucks, planes, and ships. When that link breaks, the effects spread far beyond the site itself. Russian officials initially described the strike as a minor incident. But within hours, production was halted, emergency crews were deployed, and surrounding airspace was restricted. Energy analysts quickly pointed out that even a short shutdown at a facility of this size can cause shortages, price fluctuations, and logistical bottlenecks. For Ukraine, targeting energy infrastructure is not about punishment or symbolism. It is about reducing Russia's capacity to wage war. Modern armies run on fuel. Tanks, armored vehicles, trucks, ships, aircraft, all depend on stable fuel supplies. Factories that produce weapons depend on electricity and oil-based materials. The civilian economy also depends on energy, and when that economy is strained, political pressure rises. This strategy is not new. Throughout history, wars have been decided as much by supply lines as by soldiers. What is new is the technology that allows long-range, relatively cheap drones to reach targets once thought untouchable. Ukraine does not have a navy that can blockade Russian ports. It does not have bombers that can fly deep into Russian territory. But it has developed a growing fleet of long-range drones capable of navigating hundreds of kilometers with surprising accuracy. These drones are slow, relatively small, and far less expensive than cruise missiles. But they are hard to detect, hard to intercept in large numbers, and they can be launched in swarms. The strike on the oil plant appears to have involved multiple drones, some of which were intercepted, but enough reached the target to cause significant damage. This kind of attack serves several purposes at once. First, it physically disrupts production. Second, it forces Russia to divert air defense systems away from the front lines and toward protecting industrial sites. Third, it creates uncertainty. When companies do not know whether their facilities will remain operational, investment slows, insurance costs rise, and planning becomes more difficult. For Russia, energy exports are one of the main sources of government revenue. Oil and gas fund a large portion of the state budget, including military spending, social programs, and regional subsidies. Even a small percentage drop in production or exports can translate into billions of dollars lost over time. This particular facility is also tied into export routes that supply fuel to foreign markets. If output drops, Russia must either reroute supplies from elsewhere or accept lower export volumes. In a global energy market already sensitive to conflict, sanctions, and political tension, even a modest disruption can ripple outward. After news of the strike spread, energy traders reacted cautiously. Prices did not spike dramatically, but analysts warned that repeated attacks on Russian energy infrastructure could have cumulative effects. Europe has reduced its dependence on Russian energy since the start of the war, but Russia still supplies fuel to parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Any instability in that supply chain affects global prices. From Ukraine's perspective, this is also a message to its partners. Kiev has long argued that Russia's energy sector is the financial backbone of the war. Western sanctions have targeted oil exports, price caps have been imposed, and shipping restrictions have been introduced. But as long as Russia can refine, transport, and sell oil, money continues to flow. By physically disrupting that system, Ukraine reinforces the economic pressure created by sanctions. It also shows that Ukraine is not only defending itself, but shaping the broader strategic environment. Inside Russia, the strike raises uncomfortable questions. For months, Russian officials have assured the public that air defenses protect key infrastructure. The reality is that defending every refinery, pipeline, factory, and power plant across a vast country is almost impossible. Each new successful strike undermines confidence and forces difficult choices about where to allocate resources. Should air defense systems protect Moscow, military bases, border regions, or economic centers? Should they defend cities or factories? There are no easy answers. At the same time, the Russian government must manage public perception. It cannot appear weak, but it also cannot fully hide the consequences of such attacks. Fuel shortages, price increases, or industrial slowdowns affect ordinary people. When they do, the war becomes harder to keep distant and abstract. For Ukraine, the risks are also real. Striking infrastructure inside Russia could provoke retaliation against Ukrainian energy facilities, many of which have already been damaged or destroyed. It could also complicate diplomatic relations with partners who fear escalation. That is why Ukraine frames these attacks carefully as legitimate military actions against war, supporting infrastructure. International law allows targeting of facilities that contribute directly to military capability, but the line between civilian and military use is often blurred in modern economies. Oil refineries produce fuel for civilian cars and military vehicles alike. Power plants supply hospitals and weapons factories at the same time. This ambiguity is one of the defining features of contemporary conflict. It forces difficult moral and legal debates that have no simple resolution. What makes this strike especially notable is its depth and precision. The facility was not near the front line. It was not in a border region. It was deep enough inside Russia that reaching it required long-range planning, navigation, and coordination. That shows how much Ukraine's capabilities have evolved since the early days of the war, when it relied almost entirely on Western supplied weapons and focused on defense. Now, Ukraine is developing and deploying its own systems tailored to its strategic needs. These are not symbolic weapons. They are practical tools designed to change the balance of power. This shift does not mean Ukraine is winning the war. The front lines remain largely static, casualties remain high, cities remain under threat, but it does mean the war is entering a new phase. Instead of being confined to trenches and artillery exchanges, it is increasingly about economic endurance, technological adaptation, and long-term sustainability. Who can produce more? Who can repair faster? Who can protect their infrastructure better? Who can absorb economic pain longer? These questions may ultimately matter as much as any battlefield maneuver. The strike on the oil plant is a small piece of that larger picture. It does not decide the war, but it does signal that the war is no longer geographically limited in the way it once was. It shows that the concept of a rear area, a safe industrial zone far from danger, is fading. In modern war, distance is no longer the shield it once was. As both sides adapt, we can expect more of these actions, more long-range strikes, more focus on energy, transport and production, more attempts to weaken the opponent not by direct confrontation alone, but by slowly reducing their capacity to function. For civilians on both sides, this is deeply unsettling. Energy infrastructure is not just an economic asset. It is part of daily life. It heats homes, powers hospitals, moves food, and keeps societies running. When it becomes a target, the line between war and everyday life disappears. That is perhaps the most troubling aspect of this development. Not the technology, not the tactics, but what it means for the nature of conflict itself. This is no longer just a war of armies. It is a war of systems, and systems by their nature involve everyone. The strike on Russia's largest oil plant is not just about a refinery. It is about the growing recognition that in the 21st century, power flows through networks, energy, logistics, finance, information, and whoever can disrupt those networks gains leverage far beyond what traditional weapons alone can provide. That is the real significance of what happened, not the fire, not the drones, but the message it sends about how this war is being fought, and how future wars may be fought as well. If you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more war updates and global analysis.